Hi, everybody, and welcome to this Privacy Pack Dialogue, Navigating Healthcare DSPM Challenges, presented by your allies at Spirion and Meditology. I'm Tony Napolillo with Spirion. So glad to be with you today as we explore all things DSPM in healthcare. I've gathered together a group of 3 experts in the field to have this conversation and answer your questions as well. And you can do that anytime using the Q&A button at the top. We will save time at the end to address those. And joining me today, Angela Fitzpatrick, VP of Delivery Operations at Meditology. Hello, Angela.
Hello.
Jonathan Elmer, also with Meditology, Senior Management of IT Risk Management. Jonathan, welcome.
Thank you. Hello.
And my cohort, Ryan Tully, who is the Chief Product Officer here at Spirion with me. Hello, Ryan.
Hello, Tony. Hello, everyone.
So I am going to run this group of experts through a gauntlet-style Q&A of questions related to everything DSPM and healthcare. Let's go ahead and get started. And again, if you want to submit those questions anytime, use the Q&A button at the top, and also look in that chat for a link to resources around healthcare and DSPM. I'll put that in shortly. Question 1, Ryan, I want you to start us off with, what is Data Security Posture Management, DSPM, and what is it not?
Well, that is a fantastic question. So what is it and what is it not? I guess I'll start with the what is it not. It's not a one thing, one item, one piece of software, one tool, one service, one anything that solves everybody's problem in the entire world in regards to data. It sometimes is positioned and treated that way, but it's not. What is it actually? It's a framework. It's a set of effectively tools, technologies, services, capabilities. It's the things that are necessary to ensure that your data is falling very firmly into that realm of data security. As a pure history point of view, and just in case people here do have some of that history, I want to make sure that we're all on the same page. Data security posture management was coined by Gartner, and it was an evolution from their cloud security posture management piece that they had before, which was focused pretty heavily on people that are using the cloud a lot these days. You want to have a key eye on what are you putting up there, or is there risk associated with it? What does your attack surface look like? All of these different questions, your data movement, your data lineage, etc. And it evolved because pretty quickly people recognize it's not just cloud centric these days, and it really has never ever been cloud centric only. People continue to work in a hybrid style environment, and that's true for all the major verticals out there. It's not just in healthcare, but think of all the different different locations that are going to have laptops, desktop servers, systems, things like that that are going to be keeping you in an on-premise perspective, not to mention a concept of going and transitioning older, more legacy systems that contain data or manage data, etc. So this is meant to put together a list of again, tools, techniques, etc., strategies really for sitting back and saying that what does your data security look like in terms of your data in any place that it actually exists, whether or not that's in the cloud or that's located on-prem or something to that effect, and identify what matters in those regards. It's a big focus on things like, as I mentioned, data lineage. How does data actually move around? What data is incredibly important, incredibly sensitive, that has to be regulated or controlled in some way. And some of that comes down to, in and of itself, regulations, whether you want to talk about, PHI that you have, it's HIPAA compliance, but you also have to worry about healthcare space, particularly, there's payments that are moving through. You have to worry about PCI compliance sometimes. What type of information that you have that is regulated, where does that information sit? How is that information being protected? And if that information is not being protected, what are you going to do about that? And if the information is being protected, fantastic. How effective are those protections? And overall, what does this mean in terms of risk for an organization? So that's kind of a lengthier answer, but at the end of the day, that's really what it is. This is your structure to say, what am I doing to mitigate risk? What am I doing to identify what data is potentially risky to me and matters to me and needs to be locked down to me and to my organization? And then what does this all overall look like holistically in terms of me putting together a strategy to ensure that I am, in fact, protecting all of that information across the entirety of my ecosystem?
Which is what we say all the time, is you cannot protect what you don't know you have. If you don't know what information you have out there, how are you going to protect it?
Yeah, absolutely. Spot on.
All right, let's move into question 2. Angela, what are the most significant DSPM challenges currently facing the healthcare industry in particular, and how can institutions overcome them? Is there a difference between DSPM challenges in healthcare and any other industry?
Whew, that's a good question. I think, I think Ryan hit a lot of it on the head, just kind of at the end of the first question. First and foremost, the sheer amount of data that these organizations have, is a challenge, and more than that, it's the types of sensitive and protected information they have. Right, we as a healthcare focused firm, of course, are concerned about PHI. But as Ryan pointed out, there's a ton of other regulated data, right? Like everybody is taking credit cards, right? We've got PCI data. If we're talking about academic medical centers and things like that, we've got FERPA data. The list goes on and on for the types of sensitive and regulated data that healthcare organizations need to be concerned about. Obviously, they have their own IP as well. So really, it's the sheer amount of data, and then it begs the question, where is it all going, right? So a lot of our customers are struggling to understand what their data footprint really looks like, right? So they might be using manual efforts, interview-based efforts to determine what their data inventory looks like, what types of data is in each, application and system, trying to understand the data flow. The individuals who are doing this might have kind of a limited viewpoint on that data as well. So it might not account for all of the complexities and regulatory considerations that really we all need to be considering in healthcare. So there's a ton of challenges in healthcare. I think, as it's kind of coming along in the security industry, maybe not quite as far along as some of the other industries, like financial. I think kind of the struggle with where is your data is even more pronounced. So there's a lot of things they can do to overcome these challenges. I think the issue is that some of the approaches like data labeling and DLP are kind of they're burdensome to implement. They may not be addressing the whole issue, and moreover, how do you implement those again when you don't quite know where all of your sensitive data is and the level to which you need to protect it? So that's really the kind of the challenge in healthcare, the way I see it.
Yeah, and as you pointed out, I mean, how many other industries are as regulated as healthcare, which makes DSPM even more important?
Absolutely.
And I'll echo a little bit of what Angela was actually saying there too, about knowing effectively where things are. If you start taking a look at not just regulations, right, and obviously there's a variety of different ones, and calling out education spaces as well. That was a huge call out, and that's a big one to take into consideration. But look at compliance frameworks for organizations that are looking to reduce that risk overall. They have. Look at NIST. What's the first question that they ask over there is, do you have an asset inventory? And a lot of times it is exactly what you were saying, Angela, is you run into a situation where it's like, I'm going to go talk to this person over here or this person over here. And I hope that they answer all my questions about everything regarding the data that we have and what matters. And maybe somebody forgot about that server that they've had under their desk in the IT closet for the past 10 years, right? Or you're running into all these other challenges. The concept of your quote unquote shadow data, of data existing in places you know nothing about, is a real concern, especially for a lot of the healthcare organizations that have been around for a long time. That's a consistent situation. Not to mention the challenges with shadow IT, which I know that was a big buzzword 6 years ago, something like that. But at the end of the day, it still ran into consideration, right? Sometimes the regulations and the compliance methods that you had to do as an organization were so stringent that people were saying, I'm just going to go pop it up into my own, Dropbox account over here, or something to that effect. And now, boom, there's data that could potentially be leaked. And that's a real concern if you don't have some sort of framework or knowledge or visibility or structure or anything that says, I have to find this information and then I have to know more about it as we continue. So absolutely spot on, Angela, and where you are at.
Awesome.
And certainly since I've been here, I've heard stories of extremely sensitive data. As you said, somebody, an employee inadvertently puts it on their hard drive, and the information isn't where it should be, and they didn't know that information was even out there, and how dangerous that could be regulatory wise, and just for the company's bottom line. All right, let's move on. 3, Jonathan, why don't you take this one? What are the common pitfalls that medical facilities face when implementing DSPM, and how can they avoid them? What do you
Yeah,
think?
it's a really good question. So, um, from what I typically see, I would say the biggest pitfall is inaction, right? So that inaction may be caused by one of several things. It could be either out of a concern of what they may find, right, which isn't the best reason not to do something. You kind of back to you don't know what you don't know, and sometimes they don't want to know, believe it or not. And there's also, I think, largely an uncertainty on where to start. This is a very large sort of issue or problem that an organization may have, right? And it is daunting to think about what it's going to take to get it under control. In my mind, it is essential to address these concerns head on, right? Um, Sort of rip the band-aid off type approach, right? Like we know we've got to do something here. And so taking that first step, even if it's sort of a preliminary assessment, a data risk assessment, something like that, you can start to formulate a strategy to reduce risk and mitigate some of that exposure, right? And I think I always advise our clients with large initiatives that they take a crawl, walk, run approach, right? So in this example, maybe the preliminary assessment, preliminary scanning, understanding where our data is that it shouldn't be. Um, that's sort of the crawl phase, right? We've got to figure something out, and then we say, okay, we're going to build a strategy year over year, multi-year strategy, right? In fact, to reduce this exposure, mitigate some of this risk. Now, of course, you could run into something where you're like, no, we need to fix this now. But again, that's why it's just so important to take that first step. Conversely, I think the other pitfall is overconfidence, if you can believe that. So a customer that says, well, we know where all our PHI is, and it is all encrypted. By company policy, if it has PHI, it has to be encrypted. Okay, well, let's validate that. Right? And let's you should validate it, right? If you're confident as leadership that all of your PHI, PCI, whatever it may be, is where it should be, whether that's S3 bucket or a database or share, whatever, right? And that it's all encrypted, then you should want to validate that. You should want to be able to confidently say, especially if you're a vendor in the space, right? And you're working with, as a business associate with hospitals, you would love nothing more than to say, by the way, we worked with so-and-so and they validated that we have no unprotected PHI. It's all encrypted. It's all right where we thought it would be in this S3 bucket. So I think those are two sort of studies in contrast on some of the challenges in implementing a DSPM.
It's so interesting that you say that you've worked with some organizations out there that are even afraid to look, that they'd rather put their head in the sand. In that situation, do you see that coming from more like a top-down approach, or is it the admins are like, this is too much, I can't deal with this?
I think it's more of the latter. I think with a lot of our security teams, especially over the last few years, we've noticed that some of the funding has flattened, right? Some of the investment has flattened out. And so there is a large concern about what does that take from a resource perspective, right? So we've uncovered all this risk that we kind of knew was probably there, but we didn't have a way to verify it, and we didn't know how big it was. And now we've uncovered this huge risk, and we know we need to do something about it. I personally am of the mind as a former CISO that there is really no bad data. Give me some risk so that I can go show whomever I need to that's providing me funding that, hey, I got a lot more work to do here. Keep it coming, right? I need more people, I need more tools, whatever the case may be.
Great insight. Thank you, Jonathan. All right, Ryan, why don't you handle this one? How can healthcare institutions effectively prioritize their DSPM initiatives within their broader cybersecurity and compliance strategy? I think this is tying right into what Jonathan was saying, that budgets may be tight. How do they make sure they're putting the money where it should be when it comes to cybersecurity?
So this is a very broad answer to be fair, because right now DSPM, whenever you talk about doing anything with data security or data management, or in this case just overall protecting your data, there has to be a recognition that that is the very first thing that you need to do. So going over to Jonathan's point, I mean, people are sitting back and they're saying, "All my PHI data, for instance, needs to be encrypted," and I guarantee it all is. How are you doing that guarantee right now? If you're sitting back and looking at it, is it the trust system? Somebody said that they did it, or are you going through and you're just encrypting everything? And if you're encrypting everything in hopes that you're potentially going to cover all of your PHI that you have in the ecosystem, then you're just generating problems for everybody else down the road too, right? Like, do you have to encrypt the lunch menu? Probably not. And it's going to be a little bit harder to access that information. And that goes back to even an earlier point I was saying with the whole shadow IT phrase, is that the harder you make it to access information that is relevant to people, the more likely that they are going to put information in other places where you don't have a level of oversight, you don't have a level of control, and therefore you're going to be putting yourself at risk, in a way that you don't necessarily know that you're even at risk up front. Which is a long way of saying there's a lot of tools out there that people can apply, that kind of blanket cover things. For instance, you might have a DLP solution and say, "Hey, this is great. This is exactly what I need. I understand that there's stuff that's leaving the firewall, and we're good to be covered." And it's helpful to a degree. But when you start taking a look at overall DSPM, and again, recognizing that there isn't a singular piece that says, "I bought a DSPM software and it does everything in the whole wide world for me." No, you're probably going to be putting a few different pieces together to go and make sure that you have the entirety of what your message is. And that may include some traditional DLP software that you're looking at. But at the end of it all, you have to recognize that your cybersecurity strategy, your compliance strategy that you have as an organization, is got to be data focused, data first. So when you talk about how can they effectively prioritize it, they can effectively prioritize it by making it the very first thing that they do. Finding information, finding data, and recognizing what that data is, and ensuring that you're not at risk for various different regulatory acts that are out there, or privacy acts, or anything like that. It should be step one. It's not a conversation these days any longer about if I'm going to be breached. It's now a conversation about how often is my data going to get breached, which is an absolutely terrifying thing to think about. But you can see what the world ends up looking like right now in terms of data privacy and data security, and all the different bad actors out there causing these types of challenges. So how can they effectively prioritize it? Focus on your data first. Focus on finding your data first, and then using that information to understand what your data is, where it is, and what it falls into for various different regulations, various different internal strategies, et cetera. That will make everything else in your technology stack and everything else in your service stack for cybersecurity and compliance, it will make all of them better. So it should be effectively prioritized as the first thing that you do is find your information and then progress from there.
I think actually putting your, you know, DSPM, initiative first, right? Finding your data, knowing where it is, will help you prioritize the rest of your cybersecurity and compliance program, right? To your point,
Yeah,
you
absolutely.
could go ahead and encrypt every single thing, right? And that maybe that's an easy one, right? But you can't do everything that's required, for example, for PCI and for HIPAA and on everything in your environment. It's not financially feasible. So you've got to make decisions. They should be risk-based, and that risk decision should be somewhat based on what is the type of data, where is it, how do we prioritize based on that.
So you both bring up great points, and I think anyone listening to this would say, yes, they make a good point. I still don't know how to get started. Possibly, like Jonathan was saying, it may be overwhelming. What's step one for figuring out this prioritization? That's
I
open
mean,
to anybody.
so I'll weigh in with my 2 cents. Is step one is it's got to be data focused. For step one is I got to find it. You can do everything else that you want to do. You can build your plan, your strategy. I guess in terms of implementation, let me back that up for a second. Implementation, the very first thing that you should be doing is finding your information and getting started from that, and then applying other parts of your stack. But what's actually really step one? Step one is building a plan and going ahead and getting buy-in ensuring that the organization recognizes that this is not a conversation about, I'm going to do a little DSPM project over in the corner, and then, you know, my particular org is all happy when the project is over, and then we move on. This is an ongoing program that has to be done within any organization, not even just in healthcare, but healthcare included. But it's any org has to consider that this is an ongoing program that needs ongoing support from everybody in the org. It needs ongoing support, buy-in at the executive level. That this whole thing needs to be put together in terms of a strategy, and then go and execute on that strategy. And step one should be finding your data, and when you get to the execution of that strategy.
Yeah, and just real quick to echo Angela and Ryan both made the point separately, but if, for example, you haven't done the discovery, but you go ahead and do the strategy and say, we're going to make these awesome data protection labels that are going to help protect us, but we don't know where any of that data is, then you're not going to be very effective in executing your strategy. So plan, discover, and then execute.
And I assume that fully understanding regulations and what it takes to be compliant can be a big part of that step one, right? Fully understanding what is it that is expected of you on a regulatory level, and how far are you from meeting those, meeting that compliance. All right, let's move on. Thank you for that perspective on starting. Now, Ryan, can you share some real world examples of how DSPM has mitigated data risk in healthcare? Actually, no, Ryan, I think I'd rather that to be Jonathan or Angela. From your point of view over at Meditology.
So I can take it. I think the first one that pops into my head is an actual use case that sort of brokered this partnership with Spirion, right? We actually had an engagement with the customer that was worried about data, worried about visibility. They really were very aware of the fact, self-aware, right, of the fact that they didn't know what they didn't know. We keep using that term, but it fits so well for this use case. And so they came to us and we worked with Spirion and we did what we call a data risk assessment. So a lot of focus on where that data is, what kind of data there is. Not only that, but then what are the risks associated? The output was, what are the risks associated with that data? We found terabytes upon terabytes of data that they did not know existed. They knew there was a lot, but they had no idea it was so big in some of these areas that it probably shouldn't have been. One of the surprising things they found was passport numbers. They were pretty confident that they should not have any type of passports, and found over 5,000 passport numbers during the scanning process. And so what the CISO, talking to them later, what they were able to do was immediately go to a remediation plan, right? And so they were able to move some of that data to areas that were more appropriately protected, probably is a good way of putting it, right? Or where they should expect to see it. And then there was also an interesting sort of ROI factor in this engagement as well. We found quite a bit of redundant and stale data, right? Like 15-year-old data that according to them, like, we have no reason to be retaining that data, and lots of redundant data. And so you might have, huge 30, 40 gigabyte Excel documents full of PHI that was multiplied 5x, right? So you had 5 of those sheets laying around. Why is that? And so the ROI on that is the storage costs associated with that, right? So being able to go and remove those instantly and say, we don't need these. And it also, at the same time, is lowering your exposure and risk once again, right? I also, just a couple quick ones to throw out. We also talked to a customer recently who was a new CISO, not a new CISO in the sense of this is my first gig, new CISO, new place, right? They just started. I was having lunch with him and kind of asking him about what his struggles were. And he said, they tell me that we have offloaded all of our PCI information to a third party. They say we have none in the environment. And my ears instantly perked up. I'm like, what a use case. I'm like, why don't we validate that for you? And we're in talks to do that right now, right? And he was super excited. He's like, yeah, I would love to actually know that that's true, because I have a hard time believing that we had a bunch of PCI data and they got rid of it all. And then finally, what we have seen happen, unfortunately, is that a CISO has come in, maybe they've been with the org for 5-6 years. They've done a really good job at cleaning some of this up. They think they've got a good handle on it. Then they have a breach and they find out that the sort of blast radius was much bigger than they ever thought it would be. And that's because a lot of some of the old data was done under the previous administration, where maybe there were more lax policies and requirements for protecting that data. And so while when that CISO came in 5 or 6 years ago, everything past that point was done really well. It's how did it look for the last 15 years?
Yeah, and you brought up a great point. A lot of these organizations don't know what they don't know. So it sounds like they didn't know what was going on before the CISO came on. And correct me if I'm wrong, but that is not a valid excuse if there is a data breach with the regulatory commissions, right? Like you're not going to get a pass because you said we just didn't know.
It is not, and I think we have a question here coming up. We'll talk about it a bit more, but in fact, it says quite the opposite. You should do everything you can to know. So that, sticking your head in the sand is not an excuse, and saying, well, we knew that we should have done something, but we just didn't do it.
Yeah. And just a reminder, Q&A is going to happen in just a few questions from now. We'll be finished with these. So please submit those now, and we will address those coming up. Anything else either of you want to add on real world examples, or we'll move on? Okay. How does integrating DSPM with a HIPAA security risk assessment enhance an organization's ability to protect sensitive data and maintain compliance? Either of you from Meditology, I think this would be a good one for you.
I'll go ahead and take that one too, because it's a great segue from my very last point, right? Where you asked the question, I don't know, is that a viable answer? So, without getting very wordy about what the HIPAA requirements are, they do require you to perform an annual risk assessment and to protect the confidentiality, integrity, and availability, there it is, of all PHI, right? And so if we start breaking that down and asking, well, what does that mean? That means you have to know where the PHI is to effectively protect it, right? And that CIA triad that I just mentioned. You can't effectively, as an organization, say we're compliant with all HIPAA rules right now if you don't have if you're not totally confident that you know where all that data is and that the proper protections have been applied to that protected data, right? So this partnership specifically allows us to satisfy two critical components of HIPAA compliance in one engagement, right? You probably won't get full visibility with our combined assessment, but you will have an idea of come out of there if we might have an issue that we need to address, right? And so then what do we do from here? And furthermore, Meditology ultimately is poised to assist our customers post-engagement with activities like operationalizing a true data security posture management program, right? So I think the partnership just makes sense from that. And just from a HIPAA compliance perspective, nowadays it's almost a must that you do something like of this nature, so that you can turn around and say, yes, we've looked, we acknowledge that there is some risk and we are addressing it, right? We have a corrective action plan in place.
Those DRAs are so important for shining light in the darkest corners of an environment.
And for the risk assessment, I mean, it's critical. How do you assess all of the risk to your organization when you don't know what really that footprint looks like, right? So you can figure out you've got a risk here and there, but you're definitely missing things, right? And you want to make sure you get that comprehensive view of where are our risks, and I guarantee you're missing some that are hiding in the back from a process that was stood up 15 years ago
Yeah.
that everybody forgot about, right? So when you are doing that risk assessment, it's a great time to take that more in-depth look and figure out, what's our footprint, what's going on, and then we can truly assess the risk of every, of all the sensitive data, of all of our systems that contain that sensitive data. You just get a much better picture when you do that.
It's like looking at an entire map as opposed to just one portion, right? You can't look at just one element of your environment and not expand for the full view.
Yeah, for sure.
Angela, I'd like you to continue with this question then. What unique insights or support can a full service cybersecurity firm provide to help healthcare organizations navigate the complexities of implementing and maintaining DSPM frameworks? It does sound complicated, but it is not impossible.
It is not impossible. It's not an overnight thing either, right? You're not going to solve this issue, with the snap of your finger. I think that's how a full service cybersecurity firm can really be helpful. One of the advantages is doing that kind of end-to-end support, right? So starting with strategic planning and going all the way through operational implementation. Ryan mentioned, step one is develop that plan, get the buy-in, then you go ahead and start implementing, right? As you're going through the implementation, it's important to have a partner who understands various aspects of the business. Healthcare in particular is really unique. So you need somebody who has that kind of that healthcare lens as well, and who can tackle some of the operational compliance and technical aspects of it, right? So, as a healthcare firm, we are really focused on regulatory pressures, right? Resource constraints. And so we really tailor our focus when doing a DSPM approach to the specific needs of the client, right? Everyone is different too. So we can take a deep assessment. We can look at existing workflows, technologies. We can align what's already in place to best practices. And then we can take a look at what are the opportunities as well and really figure out a prioritized, efficient, effective approach for that unique organization. We also leverage our experience, not only in regulations and data privacy, but also, across our client base. We can really see a lot of the things that are happening. We're keeping up to date with industry trends, evolving threats. And so we're tying that all in as well. Again, so we get that unique kind of approach for every client. And that helps with resilience, it helps with security, it helps with privacy, it helps with compliance, and it also helps those organizations kind of adapt to changing technology and operational and security risk. So I think most important for healthcare is really about, it's not just about protecting assets and it's not just about compliance. Those are things that we're concerned about, but really to me it's about safeguarding patient data and keeping their trust with the healthcare organization and system. And so it's really important that we're doing everything we can to understand where their data is and how to appropriately safeguard their data and maintain that trust.
So it sounds like, a full service cybersecurity firm can help with that important yet difficult step one. Where do we start?
Yeah. Through to the end, right? You got that step one, but then you've got, having somebody who can be a trusted partner to take you through, through that plan and really put it in place. It's important.
Great point. And we're going to have one more question here, and then we do have a couple that have come in through Q&A, and we'll handle those next. If there's any others that you all have, please submit those now. Ryan, why don't you please talk to us about how does Spirion's privacy grade approach to data discovery and classification fit into DSPM framework? We've talked about data discovery, we've talked about classification and why it's so important. How does it fit into that DSPM framework?
Yeah, and it's a great question. So I focused a lot on the context of data. Obviously, it's the first letter in DSPM, but that's what our privacy grade approach it really is identifying the information within an organization and doing it accurately. More so than that, it's finding data anywhere that it lives. So you want to go and you want to put it into a file system, you want to put it on someone's laptop, you put data on SharePoint, you put it in Box One, wherever these things happen to be, right? Whether it's cloud, it's on-prem, it's some sort of hybrid situation wherever your data lives in any format it lives in. Now, the world is not just PDFs and Office files these days, right? There's pictures that people take of content and then it's sitting around. There's old school access databases. Yes, I know people still use them today, but there's access databases. There's all sorts of like structured data in actual database structure and whatnot that's out there. There's a lot of different things that contain information for an organization. So being able to find it, regardless of the type of data, regardless of the location of the data, it is part one of the privacy grade approach, but part two is going ahead and doing it accurately and ensuring that you are not adding false positives or false negatives to your mix, or at least mitigating the amount of them as best as possible to ensure that you are successfully finding information. And you can automate that entire process by going through and doing data discovery and then classifying it, whether you do so persistently to a file, so it will travel with it anywhere, and that will help you with various other tools that you have, like DLP tools, which would be part of your DSPM story and your firewall tools and all. Or going through and just saying, hey, I'm making a record of this somewhere. That's important to me because I don't want to change the file for integrity purposes. But gosh, I really do need to know which of these things are related to HIPAA compliance, which are related to PCI DSS, et cetera. And now I actually have that info together. So all of that is to say, your step one is build a plan, right? And you have so many options to go ahead and work with that. There's great consulting services, as we've heard about, to go ahead and help you build out that plan too, to go ahead and get into your data security posture management program that we've referenced. But Spirion is your step one in terms of the data discovery portion, finding any of that information wherever it lives, going ahead and classifying that information and ensuring that there's a downstream activity that can take place, whether it's a form of remediation, like I have to be HIPAA compliant, and so anything that's over 6 years old, it can leave the ecosystem. Having that type of capability, that's all part of what privacy grade really means to Spirion and how we can help you deliver that.
And how surprising that data discovery process can be. As Jonathan, you had mentioned, one of your clients had found thousands of passports, correct, that they shouldn't have had, right? All right, great. Thank you, Ryan. We're going to move into the Q&A portion here. And the first question that came in, what are key metrics we should track to measure the effectiveness of our DSPM progress? Jonathan, you want to take that one?
Sure. So KPIs are always important, right? We want to show that we're making progress, right? That yeah, we might have a tool or we might have a consultant helping us, but how am I going to show my leadership that we're actually making improvements? I think ultimately, once you start to remediate what you might find from scanning, right? An easy one is obviously the amount of data that we see somewhere, right? So let's say we have a risk that we're looking at that is we found a petabyte of data in the SharePoint repository that did not have good access control. We can't lock down the SharePoint site because we need it. There's 100 other things in there. So tracking the progress of something like that, right? So saying we move, 100 gigabytes per day. So taking some kind of measurement of that overall, right? So if we would look at the sort of comprehensive risks that we had that came about from an assessment like this, right? You might say we have 15 distinct high risks, right? And you kind of don't just want to generically say, well, we have some exposed data, therefore that's only one high risk, because there could be multiple high risks associated with having that data where it's at, right? Or unprotected or whatever it may be. So then you would also want to measure the remediation of that, right? So we've remediated 7 of 15 risks or whatever the case may be. Those are just the first couple that I think pop to mind.
Oh, that was great.
I think some of your regular security metrics and KPIs become more meaningful as well. So while it's not tracking your the progress of your DSPM program. I think a byproduct is more meaningful metrics. So you might be tracking, how many, what percentage of your systems have, updated, endpoint protection or whatever. Layering that with how many of those systems have, a type of sensitive data and understanding that correlation, that metric becomes a lot more meaningful. Same for things like encryption and DLP and things like that. So kind of that layering of what type of data and where is it with the regular security metrics that you're hopefully tracking, those become a lot more effective in helping you make decisions for the organization.
Thank you both for that. We do have one more question and just a couple minutes left. So I'm going to ask this question because it's a good one, and I'd like all of you to respond with a short statement. What future trends do you think could shape the role of DSPM in healthcare? Ryan, go first.
Well, this is going to sound, I don't want to say cookie cutter these days. AI, everything AI. Whether or not it actually solves a problem, right, which is a completely different discussion to have on its own. It's pervasive into our technology stack. It's pervasive into our planning. It's pervasive into the efficiency and the productivity and the expansion of any organization out there. It's not just limited to healthcare, but healthcare is feeling it just like everybody else. It's transformative. It's changing things. It's helpful. It's going to impact the future of what's going on over in healthcare. But to also be fair, it is not necessarily a know-all, end-all, be-all in every single scenario. It does a great job of improving productivity in a lot of spaces. But currently where we stand, it's not a replacement for a lot of things that people expect it to be a replacement for out in the security stack. So we'll see some changes. Maybe we'll get additional, AI-powered tools out there, AI-powered structure, AI-powered planning, all those different pieces. And I expect that we're going to see some sort of downstream impact from that too.
I was wondering when AI was going to come up, and it comes up at the end, of course. All right, Angela, what do you think?
I think we're going to continue to see more and more detailed and more stringent regulations and compliance come into play, and that's really going to impact this as well. So we've seen a lot of changes coming out with FTC, SEC. HIPAA is going to get an update soon. Thank goodness it's time. And so, we're going to keep seeing this, and all of those changes to regulations and what we need to do for compliance is really going to impact what organizations need to do and where they need to put their focus on protecting and securing data.
Great. And Jonathan, anything from you?
So echo both of their points, especially in healthcare, the LLMs and starting to do diagnostic type activities, like that's going to be really big, and I would expect some regulation to come about doing that. For me, it's a lot of our on-prem, especially hospital type customers, are moving to the cloud. I mean, it just makes fiscal sense. They are doing it. If they're not doing it, they're thinking about doing it. Most of them are doing it and in some process of doing it. So for me, it's, well, are you just copying things over one-to-one? I haven't seen really great migration plans to date. And so it really is kind of just copy and paste, right? Like we're going to copy everything that we have on this server and we're going to copy it into this S3 bucket. That's probably not a good idea. It goes back to DSPM, right? Maybe we understand what we have, and that may even help offset some costs as we're migrating to the cloud, right? We don't need to migrate all this garbage.
Thank you all for that. We are at time, so I want to give each of you one chance here to give us your final thought. Angela, you had said DSPM plays a crucial role in defending against data breaches that could compromise patient safety and trust. That's your big final thought. 15 seconds to follow up on that.
Yeah, again, I think for me, it's all about patient data and maintaining that. We said we're going to secure it and keep it private for you. We really need to do our best to do that. We've seen these breaches happening. I've seen them with older systems, shadow IT, forgotten about legacy processes. So DSPM really, it's critical so that we can prevent that and really, take care of that patient data like we said we would.
Very important. Thank you, Angela. And Jonathan, you said with DSPM, it takes the right blend of people, process, and technology to protect sensitive healthcare data.
Yes. So I have a colleague who refers to it lovingly as the three-legged stool, right? You remove one of those legs, the stool's going to fall over. So with Meditology, we're your partner with the people in the process, right? We've got that down. We do very well at that. And Spirion powers the technology. So we are that three-legged stool, and we can help an organization with their DSPM.
Thank you. And finally, Ryan, DSPM is a framework to use as a guide. What do you mean it's a framework?
Oh, actually, I think Jonathan said it all, right? But it's people, process, and technology put together. There's no easy button that you hit and you say suddenly I'm DSPM compliant, whatever that means. It's a goal. It's tools and technology. It's people. It's process. It's plans. It's strategy. It's all of those things bundled together to ensure that what you are doing with your data, what your security posture management is within the organization, is locked down. It's tight, and it's doing things in the service of the organization.
Excellent. What a wonderful conversation. I'm so happy everybody could join us for this important conversation. Thank you to my panelists. I'm Tony Napolillo. This has been a Privacy Pact Dialogue, Navigating Healthcare DSPM Challenges. It has been recorded. It will be sent to everybody who attended to view again or share within your organization. If you have any questions, please visit Spirion.com or meditologyservices.com. The resources that I promised you in the chat will also be emailed to you. Thank you all and have a great day.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.